Hi, and welcome to UXDX. My name is Catherine, and I'll be your host for today. We've got two fantastic sessions for this afternoon or morning, wherever you're tuning in from, and they will be available to you after the event as well. Why do we do this? The world is full of bad software, and our goal at UXDX and our mission is to try and make it impossible to make bad software. That's a tough feat for a lot of companies. How do we do this? We try and get into the mindset of organization and help them shift from project focused to product focused teams. Tonight, if you've got any questions, there's a few ways of doing it. The majority of you will be tuning in on the website. So on the right-hand side, you will see a questions tab. So please ask your questions there. You can also ask your questions on Slack under Ask the Speaker if you're involved in our community there. And if you're tuning in on LinkedIn, you can ask questions in the comments and we'll collate them at the end of each session. First up today, we have Varsha. Varsha is going to be talking about the 4 Ps of grounding framework for research leads.
Thank you, Patrick.
Hi, Varsha. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining. So I won't have any questions for you right now. I'll have questions for you towards the end, and I'm otherwise looking forward to hearing your session. So
cool. Thank you.
Over to you. And see you on the other side.
Yes. So picture this. There's a solo researcher who's working at an enterprise company. Their stakeholders have never worked with research before. And this researcher is now drowning in random research projects with no intentional thread connecting them. But this researcher wanted something more. They wanted research that drove decisions and not just validated them. They wanted to be a thought partner with their stakeholders and not just a service provider. And they wanted a research practice that felt intentional and not just reactive. Does this scenario resonate with you? I'm sure it must be resonating with some of you. Well, what I just presented was my story in some different aspects at my experiences at VMware, Google, and now at Cisco. Throughout my career, I have attempted multiple approaches of creating an intentional research practices. Few of the approaches worked and few didn't, and I'm here to share those distilled lessons with you today. So I'm Varsha. I lead a research team at Cisco, and I'll be sharing the 4P framework. And this framework is meant for anyone who wants to intentionally transition from leading research projects to crafting a research practice. So let's get into it. Before we get started, a quick note. This isn't a playbook to copy as is, but rather it's meant to be an inspiration to carve your own path. So please adapt it as you see fit to your context. Most of us might have heard of this framework of people, process, and technology. It's a very classic framework. It was derived from Harold's diamond model framework back in the early 1960s. And what this framework mentions is that there are these fundamental aspects of any organization, the people, the process, and technology, and all of them have to cohesively work for the organization's success. So I derive my 4P framework from this classic framework. But then there are certain adaptations that I have made. The first adaptation is primarily this framework has been adapted for building an intentional user research practice in a high-tech enterprise context. As you can see, I have added a 4th pillar of practice and I have replaced technology with product. So you have the 4 Ps there, the product, the people, the process, and the practice. The second adaptation that we have here is that these 4 pillars need to be strengthened sequentially, and that is so because of a reason. In the classic framework, it's like you focus on all these pillars all at once. But what I realized was it was getting unsustainable for me to focus it all in one go, and it wasn't even productive. What I realized was it was better to work on them in sequence, and the sequence that you see on the screen right now. And we'll get into it in a bit. And the third adaptation I have for this framework is that I'm introducing a notion of a concept called currency. And the idea is that you keep building on one currency in one pillar, and that actually helps you strengthen the next pillar. So for example, when you're focusing on the product pillar, you will work on the unique value that you bring, and that can later help you build trust when you're focusing on the people pillar, and that can facilitate formation of systems during the process pillar, and eventually all of that will feed into how you're able to scale your practice. So let's get into it. And let's start with the first pillar, which is the product pillar. Now, in the product pillar, the goal is to start delivering some unique value. The emphasis is on the word unique here. What is something that research can bring to the table, which other disciplines cannot? And when you look at the problem that way, you can, the one way to think about it is the unique value comes when you look at any problem space differently or more deeply. But in order to do that, first you need the good domain knowledge. And this becomes even more critical in an enterprise context. So you have to start by building broad domain product business understanding. But at the same time, make sure that you're not like boiling up the ocean, because it can get too much. And then you have to have that piecemeal approach of like, start with one project, go deep, build your expertise, domain expertise in that area, and then move on to the next. And because of your depth and the research knowledge that you have, it might culminate in you delivering insights which go beyond the surface level and which bring some unique value and contribution to the team. So at this time, you just want to focus on those domain insights, the unique value, and not get too much bogged down on explaining how research works to the stakeholders. Because stakeholders really care about the outcome and they don't care much about the process, at least at the initial stages. And how would you know that you have reached success with this pillar, right? So ask yourself this. Ask if research was able to shift stakeholders' perspective on the problem any differently, right? Are they thinking about the problem with more nuance, with more context? And did it also fuel certain product decisions? So think of whether that is happening to ensure that you have achieved enough success on the product pillar. Just to see it in practice, I'll give you an example, right, of how it might look like. So the example here is maybe you are working on a code development tool, which is used by developers. So the domain knowledge you may want to earn in this space is like, what are the business KPIs? What tools, what features are we offering? What are the key developer workflows? If it's supported by AI, how does the AI work? The first project you may pick up in this area is perhaps the stakeholders are thinking of enabling the developers to share code. And the approach you might want to adopt in this context is that instead of staying at the surface level, you may want to deep dive into the context of the users and understand perhaps how they collaborate and how do they do pair programming. And how it might eventually look like is that if you do this pillar right, you will see the shift in the impact that you bring to the table. Like you might shift from the insights might shift from, a pure discoverability issues like, oh, the share button was hard to find, to some more complex and deeper insights where you inform your stakeholders that it's actually more effective for the developers to share both code and context, and they might have some different product features now to support that. So once your product pillar is strengthened, you would use that unique value that you have provided and for the next pillar, which is the people pillar, and it will actually help you build trust. And let's see how. So it's commonly known that, especially in a highly enterprise and technical space, that you gain trust by showing your competency. You show your competency through the domain knowledge, the rich user insights that you have. And because you have that under the belt, now it is easier for you to gain trust with the stakeholders. At this time, it is also important to sort of like start having more strategic product conversations. If you were having conversations about features, now you can have conversation about the whole product roadmap, but ensure that you are having that at the right levels, like find people at maybe the leadership level to have those discussions. And you are bringing something to the table because now you have developed that rich domain knowledge and you are equipped with a lot of user insights. And in these stakeholder conversations, what you have to look for is what problems do the stakeholders have and how you could mitigate those, and not just like what research you can do, because sometimes the contribution of researcher can go well beyond researching something, and you have to just pick up on those opportunities. Also pick up on opportunities to do more strategic research. And now, because you have delivered value, built those good relationships with stakeholders, it will be easier for you to secure buy-in to do more strategic research. And don't limit yourself to the one team that you're working with. Rather, like, expand your network, showcase the insights to maybe some other teams who might also find it relevant. But just a word of caution, as you're doing it, do not spread yourself too thin, because it can happen now that you're friends with everyone in the organization, but you haven't delivered value to anyone, right? And the success check that you would want to do at this stage would be just see for yourself whether you're getting involved in more key business decisions and strategic projects. How might it look like in reality, right? So maybe continuing with the same example of developer experience, now you get to research more deep questions like, how do developers view getting help from others? How does their organization treat that as a signal of their expertise? Like, those are some deep questions to get answer to. And then you might also see the shift in the impact that you bring, right? Like, you help the team shift from just building code sharing features to perhaps designing tools that build skills and efficiency of the developers. And it might also look like that you are able to expand your influence now. Like, some insights from your study might actually spark interest from some other team in the organization. And it could also look like that you have become that dot connector now, right? Like, you are also linking different stakeholder teams in an organization who might be working on similar problems. That's when you know that you have added value and you have built trust with the people. So once you have done that, you bank on that goodwill created in the first two pillars and use it in your third pillar, which is the process pillar, which focuses on building repeatable systems. And what it means is, first of all, like, now that you have deeper relationships with your product stakeholders specifically, you could actually start aligning your whole research cadence with their product roadmap. Maybe you are doing one-off research early in the earlier phases, and now is the time to bring the research process and the core product process closer together. At this time, you also may want to think about what are few, and the emphasis is on the word few. You don't want to boil the ocean here, but what are the few high leverage systems that you can invest in right now so that you can have payoff later in the future? And for example, you might find yourself in a situation where it's UX has to prove its value, and you might want to build a system which just captures the UX metrics on a quarterly basis. Or you might find that there is a lot of research already, and you just need to leverage that research. And for that, you may want to just build an insights library, which banks upon the existing research, and so on and so forth. But it really depends on context. But the key is to just invest in few, not do everything. And at the same time, when you're building a new system, like you're building a new way of recruitment, just make sure that it sort of weaves into and the existing processes, right? Do not do systems that are like isolated, because it becomes very difficult to manage them later on. And last thing would be, just don't create a process or a system just for the process sake, right? Otherwise, it will just slow you down later. And how will you know whether you have reached success in this stage? Well, ask yourself this, like, has the research become faster, predictable, and is it working at scale? So just to see an example of like how it might look in reality, maybe now you might see that there is more process alignment, like the product leader now shares the quarterly roadmaps who was initially just sharing individual project timelines, and see that as a win, and see that now your research cadence is aligned to that big picture of the product and not just individual projects. You might find yourself in a position of connecting the dots between the insights. Like you might see that there is a lot of research already that's happened, and you might do meta-analysis to connect dots between the different research studies, and you get more value out of the existing work that has already happened. And you might also see that now the decisions have become faster, like past research has become more accessible because it's in an insight library, research library, and it is sort of accelerating decisions of the stakeholders. And now that's the final pillar, that's practice. And that's when you will combine the unique value, trust, and systems that you have developed in order for you to reach scale. And let's see how. So scale here, what I mean by that is you sort of like leverage the systems that you have created previously to amplify your impact through others. And when I say others, usually it's a common assumption that in order to scale something, in order to build a practice, you always have to manage researchers, but that's not true. As long as you are creating an influence beyond yourself, that counts. So maybe you can think of scaling through designers and PMs and not just researchers. You may want to like democratize your approach now. And while you're doing so, make sure that you're sharing your what's, like the templates and the playbooks that you have created, also with your whys, like why you did a certain thing that way, your thought process. And it would also be an interesting idea to partner with other insight teams within the organization to just broaden your influence across the organization. One success question you may want to ask yourself at this stage is the research happening and influencing decisions even when you're not involved? I know it can be scary just to think that, oh, things are happening without me. But over time, I have learned that's actually a good thing. Like you don't have to be present at all the places and work is still happening. So how might it look like, right, in reality? So an example of that could be like now you have democratized research, like designers and PMs now conduct lightweight studies. For example, they can, going back to the previous example of code sharing feature, maybe they have built a new version of it and now they are independent enough to just go and evaluate it themselves, taking it off your plate. Or you could see that now there are more cross-team partnerships, like you collaborate with another research team in the organization to find opportunities in a new space, like maybe it's the developer production engineer collaboration workflows. And the biggest thing that you will see is that this research-driven problem solving, that's what you are sort of bringing to the table, will exist beyond yourself. You will see other people do that, which is a good sign. So just to do a quick recap, the 4 pillars are product, people, process, practice. You gain a currency in each pillar, which feeds on to the next pillar. Once you bring unique value, it helps you build trust with people. Once you have trust with people, you can effectively create systems. And once you do that, you use the systems to help scale up your practice. Just keep in mind that once you have strengthened all these pillars one by one, you just have to keep building upon them and the impact will compound over time. So that's it from me. Catherine?
Thank you so much for that. That was fantastic. Lots of questions that have come in. So I'm going to start with, let me just get it up. The first one was, can you make it into a playbook, please? Because I'd like to download that.
Yeah, sure. Like, I think this is definitely something that I can share. And my reason behind saying it as a playbook was just don't copy it as is. like all the things that I shared were very unique to the context of working in a highly high-tech enterprise context. So maybe your things are still the same. For example, you still have to provide inherent value, some unique value, even in a B2C space, but you might have to do it differently. So that's what I mean by.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Yeah.
And you talk about enterprise. It seems to be a lot of enterprise people that resonate it with, because we've got a question on where do you get started, struggling to get approval at an enterprise level, similar to Cisco, and I can't influence change. If you were to pick an area, where would it be?
Like where to get started?
I imagine, as in, how would you even manage change? So,
Yeah.
do you talk to your manager? Do you talk to your team?
Yeah, I think it varies, but I would say like it really starts with like, what are you offering first? Like, I think that's the fundamental shift I had to make in the way I was approaching things. Like, initially, I was like, I want a seat at the table. And then I had to sort of shift that learning to I have to earn the seat at the table. And wanting to earning are two different things. So I would say you have to start with what value you're bringing to the table. And maybe it's like for researchers, it's like how we look at things differently. And if you can showcase that, if you can just have one case study to show that this is the difference, this is how we can do things differently, and maybe that's where that becomes your starting point. But if your starting point is give me a seat at table and this is how research work, that is not going to resonate. You have to speak their product language. So you could start it yourself, or if you're finding it like, or maybe you can tag team with your manager. Like it really depends on your situation, but just think about what is the value I'm bringing to the table apart from talking about my research process.
And so, when you talk about value for you, like from you as in you as an individual, what did you think was the what did you write down was the value that you would bring?
And I think the value, it wasn't before, like, so for example, at the start of the project, it would be things like I would understand what is involved in that problem space. I would try to understand it deeply. At the get-go, the value I am bringing to the table is just the good questions I'm asking my stakeholders. Like I have had stakeholders, I have not even done research, I have not even given them insights. But the first thing they told me was, oh, you ask really good questions. Or, oh, I did not think about it that way. So that's the mini value, that's the micro value you brought into the conversation. Then you go do off your research, you find something which maybe the other people have missed. And that's like that second micro installment of value you bring to the table. But I think the value you bring to the table is the work that you do and not just what you say you can do.
It's bringing the why, but yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
And what was your proudest moment for when you got others involved in research?
I think the proudest moment, and this was also my scariest moment, I would say. And I remember asking one of my mentors this is like, hey, what if like, we democratize research and if other people are doing research without asking me, like, it's sort of like a thing on your ego, like, oh, now you are not like, they are so well versed with it that they can do it on their own and no one is coming back to you. So I would say that was a very scary and existential crisis moment for me. I'm like, what am I going to do if things don't go via me? And then actually that itself turned out into the proudest moment, which was like, it's actually good that things are happening without me now because it frees up my time and I can go do something else. So I think that was just a shift in the mindset of how I was looking at things.
Yeah, no, great. And it leads on nicely to the next question on democratizing research. So how democratized is research at Cisco? And is it would you have the same opinions, or is it where you would like it to be?
So the thing is that the way it's very different. Like there are different research teams within Cisco. It's not a centralized piece right now. But we had more democratization in VMware because the ratio was too bad between designers to researchers, and we had to do that. In Cisco, the reality is different. We have a huge research team, which can actually cater to a lot of more research questions as compared to what it was at VMware. So I would say the level is low, but we have but we still have like basic templates as well as research reports. So we have all those in. So even if it's not a designer or new researcher who comes in, they can just start delivering quickly because now they have those systems and templates in place.
Yeah, no, fantastic. That was really, really great. Thank you so much for that. That was a fantastic session. I really enjoyed it. And it was really clearly laid out in terms of the flow. So really, really appreciate the structure to your talk. For those tuning in as well, if you want to revert back to it, obviously you can do it on LinkedIn and on our website now, but we will have it on Varsha's profile and on uxdx.com too. Varsha, thank you so much for your time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, next up, we have Sanika. How are you doing, Sanika?
Hi, Catherine. I'm doing well.
Yeah, are you excited?
Oh, yeah, super excited.
There might be a lot of questions after the event, so I will we'll talk in more detail about that. If you can share your screen.
Of course.
Thank you. Perfect. Fantastic. So I will leave it over to you, and I will see you for questions on the other side.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this talk. Today, I'm going to be presenting a case study in how you could optimize work-life balance in geo-distributed product teams. So quick introduction, I'm Sanika, and I have worked at Nutanix in the UX design team for almost 10 years now. I joined when the team was just a few people in San Jose, and then over the years, I have seen it grow to like almost 80 people across multiple continents. In my personal life, I'm a mom of 2 energetic little boys, and this work on cross-geo collaboration is sort of my day job is UX design, and this work is just something that is an initiative that I took up over the years because I started noticing that meetings outside of work hours had started to impact our team effectiveness and morale. And so making sure that we build a sustainable, high-functioning team has since become an area of deep interest for me. So I'll start with some recent stats that I've seen from a survey from Buffer. And here you can see that almost 75% people said that their company operates in multiple time zones. And we live in a global world, right? What's interesting is that 62% said that not just their company, but their immediate teams whom they regularly collaborate with are actually also distributed across multiple time zones. And this has certainly been true for us at Nutanix. I mean, as we've grown over the years, this is what collaboration looks like for us. We have our core team HQ in San Jose. Then we have a big team in Bangalore. And we also have a few team members who are in Berlin. And for good measure, we also have like people dispersed over the other areas as well. We have one person in Australia, a few people in other places in the US. And so you can imagine with this kind of a geo-distributed team across time zones, collaboration. So when time zones collide, you get scenarios like this. Like imagine one team member who's scrambling to finish dinner to get onto a call, and another hasn't even had their morning coffee yet. Or one person is missing their regular morning routine to take a meeting with a teammate who's on the other side of the world, who is in turn missing bedtime with their kids. And so I realized that this was starting to come up more and more in informal discussions, and people were feeling this. And this was starting to become a problem for our team. And so what do? Well, we are the design team after all, right? So we decided to apply design thinking to this problem. And so we started with the first step, empathize, which means we really wanted to understand this problem deeply. Is it something that was mostly affecting people in one geography or all of them? We wanted to understand what was the extent of this problem. And so we did a survey which captured a bunch of these different kinds of details and also just free-form inputs from people all across our team. The results were quite illuminating. So clearly this was a problem, right? And what you see on this chart here is the number of people from each geography and then overall who said how much was their home and personal life disrupted by meetings that take place after us. So outside of the regular sort of 8 to 5 time that we are usually in office. And you can see here that almost 75% of our overall team said that their personal life was at least somewhat disrupted, which is like a 4 or more on our 7-point scale. That their life was somewhat disrupted at least because of these meetings that are across time zones. I'll give another quick example of the kind of data we collected. So we tried to capture when meetings start earliest and then when they end for different people in different time zones. And there were people who were taking meetings as early as 6 a.m. and 6:30 a.m. There were people who were attending meetings as late as like 11 p.m. and like 11:30 p.m. at night. And sometimes this might be the same person. So clearly this was not very sustainable. There was a lot of other data that we collected, but I'm just going to highlight a couple of quotes which really reflect the overall sentiment of the kind of feedback that we received. So one key thing was that people just really wanted better, clearer guidance. They wanted clear expectations from the design leadership. Another one was there was this uneasy sense that not all geos were being treated equally. And then the third one was that scheduling meetings was really hard because we are across 3 time zones. And so the only sort of convenient time that everyone can meet at a reasonable hour is this 7 to 9 a.m. slot in the US time zone, Pacific time zone. And those slots fill up really quickly. So there's no time to do meetings and things keep getting pushed out. So now, armed with all of this rich data, we set out to clearly define the problem statement. Number 0 is that we realized that there were just too many meetings and people were getting burnt out with these meetings that were happening after us. But the other 3 problems that we clearly defined and saw from all of this data was, one, the lack of clear expectations, both in terms of the volume of meetings, the timings, and how to deal with different kinds of tricky situations and scenarios. We also realized that scheduling meetings was getting hard and we needed to do something about it. And a third important insight was that cultural expectations differ in different geos. And I'll talk a little bit more about this as we go further in. So with a clear problem statement, now we got into our ideation phase. And we conducted multiple brainstorming sessions, first in smaller groups and then like larger sessions within each geo to brainstorm and refine the plan and to make sure we are solving the problem in the right way. So there were 4 main guiding principles that we followed when we came up with our eventual guidelines. Now, number 1, which is the obvious one, is that we wanted to make sure we create these guidelines in a way that enables people to establish boundaries and maintain appropriate work-life balance. And this is very important as like sort of like the basis of everything that we did. The second was that we wanted to make sure that we provide very clear guidelines and set the right expectations with the entire team. The third really important thing was that we were all in this together. So we wanted to make sure the guidelines reflected that all of the different geos will share this burden equally. And then, of course, with coming up with these guidelines, we wanted to be sure that we take cultural norms into account. So, for example, people in San Jose might be okay with taking like a 9 p.m. meeting after dinner is done. But for India, we realized that was peak dinner time and people really did not want to be disrupted at like 9 p.m. And so we took into account some of these kinds of things when coming up with our final set of guidelines. So now that we had like a clear goal of what we wanted to achieve, we came up with our first version of cross-geo communication guidelines. And I'll walk you through some of the key recommendations, why we made them, what was the thought process, and then what we have found to be useful. And I'll share some practical tips as we go along. So the first and foremost is this understanding that we are a cross-geo company. We have teams in different places. And so some non-zero amount of collaboration needs to happen outside of working hours. And this is just an expectation that we wanted to set with the team. But even more than just this vague, there's going to be something non-zero. What we did was the design leadership and executive team came up with like very clear guidelines in terms of how many hours should you expect to spend on collaboration with other geos, just taking meetings outside of like sort of the core 9 to 5. But this was different per based on the level of each team member, right? If you are a more junior IC, you would typically be working with others in your own time zone, and you might have a little bit of cross geo collaboration. If you're a lead, you're probably working with multiple teams across time zones, so that goes up. And if you're a manager, it goes up even more. And so we came up with these guidelines, and what that ensured was now people had a clear understanding of what was the expectation, which also meant that if they were exceeding that, they clearly knew what to do. Like, it made it easier for them to bring this up with their peers or bring this up with their manager and have this conversation that, hey, this is going far beyond what we have decided as a team, and we need to figure out some mitigation strategies. Next, we shared specific things we could do to just reduce the overall need for meetings by improving how we did our async communication. And beyond replacing meetings, I think async communication is something that needs to become a core part of the culture. It's how creativity can travel across time zones. And so here are a few principles we shared with people in terms of async communication. Now, the first one is just share your work. Don't wait for a meeting. So don't wait to be able to schedule a meeting 3 days out just to be able to share like some quick design work you've been doing, or just to get some feedback. And so we shared some strategies about how to share your work in an async way. The other important thing with async is you want to make sure that what you share is designed for clarity and action. So it should be very easy for the person you're sharing it with to know what exactly you're sharing and what is your question. And a side effect of this is this just brings a lot more clarity of thought when we are also going through our design process, because once you have to think clearly about, hey, this is what I'm sharing and this is what I want people to answer. No, you can't rely on the ad hoc meeting, hey, let's just hash it out. You have to think more clearly about what your goals are. A third and really important thing is we wanted to make sure when sharing things async, you want to keep everything visible and centralized. And what I mean is, this is probably something a lot of you have experienced. There's something in Notion. There are a dozen Slack channels and DMs. There is something going on in an email thread. And once you have these multiple different channels where things are being discussed, it really becomes hard, especially as if your company is remote, just to keep on top of things, know what is the latest decisions, know what is exactly going on. And the fourth one is sort of a more meta, which is know when to use meetings intentionally versus when would async communication work better. And I'll give some examples of that as we go forward as well. So here are some practical tips that have worked really well for our team. So when we said, don't wait for a meeting, just share something quickly. Sharing just your design file is often not very helpful, especially other cross-functional team members like PMs and engineers find it very hard to provide feedback that way. So record a quick video walkthrough on Loom, just have a quick voiceover, and that way people know what exactly you're sharing and what kind of feedback you're looking for. Another thing is, we are designers, so there's a lot of brainstorming collaboration we do. But what we started doing was set up an async brainstorm first in FigJam, have it open for a little bit. Then the meeting organizer would go in and collate things, and then we would do a live session to sort of hash it out. And this meant that we are leveraging async communication to make the live meetings more effective and also reduce the amount of time that we spent on these meetings, which often happen late at night or super early in the morning. Then centralizing feedback, and I'll give an example of what that really well is. So in our team, there is like a temporary Slack channel that gets created for a release. We have longer release cycles. I'm in an enterprise company, but there's basically one Slack channel that gets created for a release and for a feature. And if you're working on that feature, you are in that channel, and it is expected that any updates, any communication, even if you have updated something somewhere else, if there's an email thread, we'll make sure that it gets summarized in that Slack channel, and everyone knows this. And so that makes it more straightforward for people to know, okay, this is where I go, and this is where I get all of my updated information. And now some of these AI summarization tools, like we have Glean, which can help summarize long Slack threads and things like that, that really now helps us keep on top of things. Another tip that has really worked well is just sending end of the day updates. So if I'm collaborating with someone in Bangalore, what I will do is, right before I wrap up my workday, I'll write like a short paragraph of what has happened during the day, any updates, anything that my collaborators in India should know. And I'll just send like a quick update so that once they come online in their morning, they know exactly what's going on, they are up to date, and we don't spend like this 24-hour cycle of going back and forth on questions and answers. And then the last tip I have for you guys is scheduling messages, and I've had a lot of success with this. So Slack lets you schedule messages very well. Slack even tells you what time zone the other person is in and what time it is for them. It just makes it really easy. And so if I have something that I need to share with someone in India, but it's 2 p.m. for me and it's like 2:30 at night for them, I'll schedule that at a time when they'll come online, and that way they actually get to see the messages when they are likely to be in front of their laptop. So now coming back to when you actually do need cross-geo meetings and when they're actually helpful, and you can't just rely on async or recording things and sharing them and stuff like that. There are a few areas which we have found meetings across, even if we have to do meetings across time zones, they are really, really valuable. And I'll talk a little bit about that. One is having a global design all hands. So everyone across all of our different geos will tune into this. This happens like once a month. And we find this is very important for everyone to keep up with what's going on across the design team. And we make sure that this meeting is collaborative and sort of it's very interactive. So people will ask questions in chat. There's a lot of things going on. It's not just one way, one person talking, right? Then we do some UX strategy reviews, and this is also another area which we have found is important to make sure we actually have this sort of face-to-face Zoom conversations rather than everything being async. And this is where a core group of more senior design leadership will meet once a week or once in 2 weeks to review really important areas of our UX strategy and make sure that we are doing the right things. There are other things managers need to sync up regularly, and that becomes important. And the last one is actually doing one-on-ones to sort of build rapport with teammates who are in different geos. And this has an interesting downstream effect because once you build that rapport, further communication can be more async, and you've built that trust, and now you know how to interact with that person a lot more. So that initial investment actually pays off quite a bit. The other thing that we shared in the guidelines was meeting hygiene. And this is really important because this is still about when you have cross-geo meetings, but what this ensures is that those meetings are effective. You don't get stuck in a cycle of, hey, we just like talked for an hour and we still don't know what is the next step. And so good meeting hygiene makes just the amount of cross-geo meetings overall reduce. So a few things that we have started following very, very diligently. One is the meeting organizer is always expected to share the agenda and the goals of the meeting, what is the expected outcome of the meeting in advance. The other one is there has to be at least a 24-hour heads up for scheduling or canceling these cross-geo meetings which happen outside of sort of the regular work hours, because you don't want to wake up at 7 and realize, hey, someone just scheduled a meeting overnight while you were sleeping and now you have to be on in 2 minutes. Or on the other hand, where you've cleared your entire personal schedule for the evening, and then you realize 15 minutes before the meeting time that it's just been cancelled because of some or the other reason. The third important thing is coming prepared to meetings. And we haven't gone quite as far as sort of the Amazon model of having a memo and everyone reading it, but we have become a little bit better in terms of how prepared the organizer is in terms of what exactly we need to share and what are the expected outcomes and things like that. And then we diligently follow up with meeting recordings. Again, AI makes this really easy because now you can also share like a AI summary of the meeting, and we share notes, action items, and tag the people who need to take things up. Now I'll come to the most important part of our cross-geo meeting guidance, and this is the one that has made amongst the biggest impact of everything that we have done so far. And this is where we talk about, lay down clear boundaries about what time is it reasonable and unreasonable to schedule meetings with other geos. Like we don't want someone scheduling a meeting with you when it's 11 p.m. for you, right? And then along with that, there were a few other follow-up things we wanted to make sure, like when do we have global team meetings? What do we do when it's standard time versus daylight saving times? Because India doesn't follow daylight savings, and so the hours get a little different, the difference get different. And of course, this is we made it like this is not expected working hours. This is just times when you might need to take meetings outside of your core working hours. That's it. And so what we did was we actually came up with this kind of a model where for we had green, yellow, and red zones. And red zones means do not schedule a meeting. Like this is, you don't want to be scheduling a meeting in the middle of the night when people are sleeping. But also we made sure that this was equitable and every region had like a clearly defined green zone, a couple of yellow zones, and then red zones to protect their most important time. We also made sure that there's a slot where all three geos can talk together. So you can see this is like that morning 8 a.m., 9 a.m. slot. And for anyone who's tuning in, thank you for taking time out of this like really packed slot where we have a lot of meetings. But we made sure that there's a slot where all three geos could collaborate on things together. But also individual slots where just San Jose people could talk to Bangalore, or San Jose folks could talk to Berlin, and things like that. And this is daylight saving times, and then things get a little bit different when you go to standard time, because now India is one further hour. Like it's the difference changes a little bit, and so what worked in the summer doesn't really work once it becomes winter. And so we had like a slightly different model for that. And then once we had this, we of course shared it with the team, we shared it with everyone, made sure they know when and how to schedule meetings. But then each of us individually just went in and updated our calendars, Outlook calendars, to reflect this. Like I just have a block on my calendar which says I'm sleeping, like don't schedule meetings in this time. And this has worked really well for us, because now the expectations are clear. This is when you can schedule meetings freely, but these are times when you absolutely shouldn't. And I'll go through some scenarios we shared with people in case things go differently. So the last part I want to go through in terms of guidelines is how we shared some examples of specific scenarios they might encounter. And this was really helpful, especially for the more junior team members, to know what to do when something happens which they are a little unsure about. So let's say someone in your design team sets up a recurring meeting and it's in one of your red blocks. Ask them to reschedule if you're not comfortable doing that. If it's someone very senior or someone you don't have a good rapport with, feel free to ask your manager for help. If it's a wide meeting, like a team-wide meeting or even wider, figure out if your presence is necessary or if it's just like an FYI for you, and then ask them to record and send you the notes. Another fun, interesting thing we did was actually a flow chart of what happens if a single meeting is set up. Then you figure out, is your input required? No, then just ask for recordings. But if your input is required live, does it need to be live? Can it be async? So just we shared these and like a bunch of more scenarios with the design team to help them in their decision-making process about how to go about meetings that get scheduled. So with these guidelines in place, now we went into our test and iterate phase. We implemented these guidelines, and then about a year later, we did a follow-up survey. Things had improved. So one example here, and there's a bunch of other stuff which I'll probably not share today, but I just wanted to highlight this, which is, remember how we said earlier about said that their home and their personal life is disrupted by after that had substantially reduced when you can say that there are a lot more people. So things were helping. We also captured in the survey what was actually working and what was not working. So this is just one snippet of the kind of information we captured, which is, hey, async and better notes and recordings was actually helping quite a bit. But we have like a no Friday meeting policy, and that was not really being implemented. And so we knew what was working, what was not working, and this helped us iterate further. Another thing I want to highlight is there was a big intangible benefit to this effort, because just doing this made people more comfortable talking about cross-geo meetings and made it easier for them to speak up. It also made the team feel more empowered and feel like they're a part of the solution. And so that really helped, and people were taking initiative and trying to figure out how to make sure their own schedule was sustainable and working for them. So with that, we went into our iterate mode. So I just shared data about like the 2 surveys, but since then we've done 3 more. So we've done a total of 5 surveys so far, about like every 9 to 12 months. as we move forward, there are other things that come up. For example, return to office happened for us a couple of years ago. And so we captured details about how that impacted cross geo meetings and like being able to drive into office. We realized that our scores went down at a certain point, and we noticed that this was because this was like a critical product launch time for us. So there are these peak meeting zones, periods which happen, and we started capturing data about that. And I'll give a quick example of that where we have this meeting happens, right? So if you are an IC, individual contributor, and you're expected to do 20 hours of maximum of cross-geo meetings, now we captured, okay, in an average non-peak sort of steady time, how many do you have? And then obviously anyone who's in the red, we would follow up and make sure, figure out what's going on. But then we also captured data about this kind of peak time when the volume of meetings is more than average due to events like upcoming product launches or other things that are going on. And we captured information about how many people are within the lower bound of the expected range, upper bound, people who are slightly above, and then people who are much above the expected range. And this helped us, again, figure out what guidelines were working, which specific areas, which specific product teams might need more help. And we went on iterating from there. So with that, I would like to conclude and just say that work-life balance is an evolving design challenge. It's not like this is done. So we continue to benchmark, we continue to improve. And one key learning for us was that as a design team, we are a part of multiple different product teams, right? So we work with engineering and PM teams from multiple different working on multiple different products. And this makes it especially harder for designers. And so we are now working on evangelizing and getting this kind of guidelines adopted across other teams, because it's helpful if we follow these practices within the design team, but it's not really fully helpful unless everyone you collaborate with is also on the same page about some of these things. And so those are the things we have ongoing, and those were some examples of what has worked for us. And with that, I would like to conclude. Thank you so much. And thank you, UXDX, for this opportunity. Please do let me know if you have any questions.
Sorry, it took a second. That was fantastic. I had a lot of questions, including a bleeping hate that when people cancel last minute on meetings.
Oh, this has been like such a big issue for us. Yes, I hear you.
Yeah. Well, for me as well, I think it's more also respecting other people, even outside organizations and things like that. But yeah, internally, we tend to treat colleagues unfairly, and I love the clean up your meeting act. It really is lovely. Yeah. You touched on a lot of things. I will stick on the meeting one. It was the majority of the questions were in that. And then I want to go back to your earlier questions around ideation and team size. But actually, we'll start off with that. For team size, what is, in your opinion, is a really good team size for ideating?
So for this particular case, we started with the brainstorming and ideation process in a smaller group. So just 3 to 4 designers locally just brainstorming about this. And then once we had like an initial idea of the direction, we then opened it up to our entire team that was co-located. And the reason for this was mainly to understand and get inputs on the cultural expectations and individual experiences that people had. And so I would say that initial ideation brainstorming, not more than 3 to 5 people. And then once you have a structure in place, it can be 20, 25 people there, but you need to have a good structure in place at that point.
Yeah, that's really valuable to know. And many of us work outside of the 9 to 5 hours with international teams or clients. This is more of a statement than anything else. I guess, what is the hardest thing about working with globally distributed teams?
It's hard to pick one thing that is the hardest. But I think the last minute meetings and cancellations have been the biggest topic that we keep seeing come up every survey. That alongside just the sentiment that, hey, how do I even schedule the meeting? Like, there are no slots for everyone I need to attend this meeting. And so clearly I need to figure out a better way, right? So I think those are the two largest things which people really feel strongly about what we've seen in our team so far.
What resonated with me with is that because we're a tiny team, and so for example, we have to stretch ourselves across the globe, and it can be hard. Like, we try to go, let's minimize it. From our perspective, we're in Spain. The hardest one to get to is maybe New Zealand or LA on West Coast. And you based where you're from would be you'd be knowing the cities that are hard.
Absolutely.
What you have a different structure and hours, and maybe it might be good to read back in your slide on if you could open it up and bring back that slide on the meeting hours.
Yeah.
So you have different meeting hours as well for different time zones, but also it's a different requirement whether you're a manager or an individual contributor. Managers needing that should have more time off hours than individual contributors.
Yeah.
Is there any pushback on that? Or what, if so, what is the pushback? I love the baseline, by the way. Here's your expectation so that everyone knows what's the expectation.
Yeah, I think laying out that expectation clearly made a big difference, because up until then things were just very ambiguous, and the more junior or the more introverted people would just go along with whatever, and then the people who had been maybe around longer or people who are more vocal would do things more, like they would be more okay with sort of pushing back, right? Laying out this expectation, one, I just want to say, helped really, like it really helped with that. Pushback we have seen is more along the lines of things like, hey, we have the 8 a.m. slot for San Jose, or we have, I don't know, like the 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. slot, which is still yellow for Bangalore. And that's something we arrived at with consensus within the team. But even these individual teams are large. So the San Jose team is about 30 people. The Bangalore team is even larger. And so clearly this is not going to work for everyone in the team, right? So there are some people for whom these slots are just inconvenient. Maybe someone in San Jose needs to do a school drop off every morning at 8, and so it's just really hard. Or there's people in Bangalore who are like, no, but I'm an early bird and I get to office super early and this is very inconvenient for me. And so I think we have received that kind of feedback, and we keep taking that into account and trying to figure out what to do. But in terms of structure, we still need some structure. And then within that structure, there's now a lot of leeway for people to say, if you're doing a one-on-one, feel free to do it at a time that's more convenient to you. But if there is a critical, like, product team-wide meeting that's going to happen, we all need to make sure there's something that works for all of us that we can do. Now, one thing I also want to highlight in terms of the pushback is, we have seen, and this is where that peak time versus average time that we did came into picture. And the pushback was, hey, these last few weeks have been like really crazy, and I have had like every night I've had meetings, or every early morning I've had meetings. And that's when we realized that there are these crunch times when we really need to address and make a big improvement there. And so a lot of our effort in the more like recent few months has been in figuring out what happens exactly during these crunch times, and how can we front load the work that happens there, and just, this is outside of meetings, but more structural, more basic changes that we make in order to address that kind of pushback.
Yeah, love it. And then one quick last question. It's on agreement on guidelines globally. So you talked about the initial getting the agreement back earlier in your talk. So how do you get agreement on guidelines globally in places like India, Berlin, or the US?
Can you tell me, like, when you say agreement, what exactly do you mean?
I guess it's when you talked about culture, and you were talking about what's acceptable. Europe would have a different working culture to the US versus India.
Yeah.
How do you get cultural agreement on what's so the initial stages of that agreement, the upfront part with that 3 to 5 people versus the latter part?
Yeah. So I think with the 3 to 5 people, we had like an initial idea of what things should be, right? So initially we started with saying, hey, for example, so maybe initially we started with, hey, for Bangalore, we also make this like 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. slot also available, or something like that. But then we realized, no, people in Bangalore actually prefer to have dinner during that time, and that's feedback that we received from the team. And so before like making any of this official, after that initial brainstorming, we did like individual sort of almost like design critiques within each geo, shared some of the proposals with them, and then got feedback on this and many other things, like the exact time slots and then some of the other guidelines that we had in place. And so that helped get more of a buy-in. People could make sure that their voice was heard and they could vote on things. So for example, Bangalore voted on, hey, I'd rather do 10 to 11 p.m. than like start earlier at 8:30 or 8 p.m. because again, our culture there is a little bit different. So I think that, and just knowing that, hey, we are all in this together and that we are trying to build a system that's fair across all of these geos, I think those two things really helped.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. Sanika, that was amazing. Thank you. Really, really valuable. I think anyone, even outside product teams, it's useful to know. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for your insights. And we will see you again.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining in, and thanks UXDX for this opportunity.
Thank you. That was really, really great from both Sanika and Varsha. Two phenomenal talks. They'll be up on our website tomorrow for you to watch again, or share with anyone on your team of bits that you liked. That's it for now. There will be a global product week happening in October. So we will have a few cities announcements by next week. So make sure you keep an eye on our website for more information for in-person events. They always sell out fast. So we look forward to seeing you at one of those. And we will also have our New York event, which will be live streamed for everyone to watch, which is quite exciting. So make sure you sign up for that. And bye for now, and we will see you more next week.